Well, when I left university, I went straight into banking, which is what a lot of people did who read history and the humanities in those days. That was in the early 1980s. And my first job, I went to New York on a training program, through which I met people who lived throughout the world, and I've stayed in touch with ever since. And I learned the sort of basic theory of finance and banking, and I found it fascinating, much to my surprise. So I worked in banking for about 10 years. I became a trader, and then I worked for a venture capital company for 3 years. And then my first book, Free to Trade, was published, and I became a full-time writer. I think I'd always admired writers, but I'd never believed that I could actually be one. It was sort of something that other people did. And I read somewhere, I think Evelyn Waugh or someone said that you can't basically write as a young man unless you write comedy, which I thought I couldn't do. So I kind of discounted it until I was 29, or nearly 30. I suddenly thought, well, maybe I can have a go at writing and see what happens. Yes, there were. I mean, I think my problem was in my 20s I was a bit of a sort of intellectual snob. So I read literary fiction. I'd read the odd Dick Francis as a sort of guilty pleasure. And I think when I started writing, I thought I would do a Dick Francis on the City. Dick Francis writes very good thrillers about horse racing. I thought I would try and write a similar style of thriller about the city, and that would be a good sort of framework to write about the city in a way which I would enjoy. And I was in it for the enjoyment rather than for any great literary messages. So Dick Francis, I suppose, was the most important. I suppose Tom Clancy I'd read Hunt for Red October, and I was impressed by the way all that military detail was interesting. And I thought if military detail, well obviously submarine detail, could be that interesting, maybe I could do the same with the bond market. Well, it's changed over time. I think this is true for a lot of writers. My first book was very much direct experience. And then over time I found that I was using up the direct experience and was finding writing about indirect experience more interesting. And by indirect I mean sort of experience, things I've seen but haven't participated in, things my friends have been doing, that sort of thing. And so over time the books have become, I mean, they're still all about finance, but they're less directly what I've been involved in. My third book, which was called The Market Maker, was about trading emerging market bonds, which is something I've always wanted to do, and about Brazil, which is somewhere I'd always wanted to go. So that was a sort of movement away from what I knew directly. But even so, it was still how to trade the bond markets, how markets move up and down, which is something I'm fascinated in. So it's sort of a mixture of the two. I thought about, if I was trying to write a bestseller, I should really dumb down the financial stuff, because people wouldn't be interested and they wouldn't understand it. Then I thought, well no, what I'm really trying to do is write a book that I enjoy, about things that I think are interesting and other people should be interested in. So I'll include all that, and if they like it, I think they'll like it, but if they don't like it, tough. I tried to make it so that an intelligent reader who didn't know anything about finance would still be able to understand it if they put the effort in. But I made it, real and authentic. And in retrospect, that was an extremely good decision. If I dumbed it down, it wouldn't have worked. So I think the thing to do is to make it authentic, put in the real details of the real complexities, explain them clearly so that the reader has a chance of understanding it if they're willing to put the work in. That way you come across with a sort of authentic, original book that says something, rather than an attempt to be a sort of clone thriller of, that you see in a bookshop. Well, finance is actually a very broad subject. I mean, my last book, See No Evil, is about, it was supposed to be about a newspaper takeover, and then the newspaper proprietor was South African, so it became, a lot of it was about apartheid, because his wife had died 15 years ago. So, I mean, that's very far removed from bond trading in my first book, or a small high-tech virtual reality company in my second book. I mean, each book you can really write about very different subjects. I have found, I've been working on something recently which is a totally different type of thriller, but that isn't really because I haven't got any new ideas or I feel constrained by financial thrillers. It's more that a change would be challenging, which is sort of slightly different. I do outline, and I start off with a very simple story, which is just one page, and then it becomes 2 pages, and then it becomes more and more and more pages, and it ends up about 25 pages. And even then, interestingly enough, I've got something, which is 25 pages, lots of different scenes, it seems pretty complicated to me. But it's only as I write it and as I get a feel for what the characters are really up to and what they want and how they interact, then I'll get ideas for how that synopsis can be changed. And I will change it. One of the things I discovered was about 3 books ago. I started, after 25% of the book, I divided the book into quarters, I started stopping there, pausing and reading through what I'd read, and then making changes, not just to the 25% that I'd already read, but to the initial synopsis and the outline. I found that really helped, because it was only when I was reading the sort of flow of the book that I could understand where the characters were going, what they were trying to do, how the pace was building up, what the important issues of the books was becoming. And so I think changing the synopsis as you're writing is a good idea. But in particular, this kind of review process worked quite well. And it took me, each break took about 2 weeks, sort of a week to read through and make the little changes, and then a week to sort of think about it and change the future. So, which obviously adds to the time taken writing the book, but I think it was well worth it, and certainly saves time on rewriting.